Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome, everybody, to Turn the Page, the Syosset Library podcast. My name is Barney Leventino. I'm joined today with my colleague,
Stacy Bencher.
And we're happy today to have our guest, Richard Knox.
Hi.
Mr. Knox, I just had the pleasure of enjoying your program here on Broadway Duets. It was fascinating. It was interesting. And first question that comes to mind, you're obviously somebody that loves the theater, loves music. How did your love of Broadway come about?
Well, basically, it's something I kind of grew up with. My parents, particularly my father, loved, he was very musical, not in terms of, performing or anything, but he had a massive record collection. He loved classical music and opera in particular. He took me when I was a teenager and, probably listening to more rock and roll than anything else. He gave me an appreciation for, not just, as I said, opera and classical music, but Broadway. And we would go, and of course, in those days, ticket prices were not as prohibitively expensive as they are now. We would go, and see, shows like Gypsy and, Fiddler on the Roof and, some classic shows from the 50s and 60s. And, all the Rodgers and Hammerstein productions. And if you missed the original run, there was always a revival a few years later that you could see. And then, of course, with the most popular shows, there were inevitably musical movie versions, that came out. Usually, the rule of thumb was the show had to be closed for a few years before the movie was made.
Wow.
Because they didn't want the movie to detract from the people going to see the production on Broadway. Nowadays, that's not necessarily true.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I this morning I just took a quick look to see what's running on Broadway,
Right.
and I see that there are the bio shows. You have Cher, Carole King, the Jersey Boys, and Donna Summer's got one.
Right.
Then we have all the
That's
Disney
the new trend
shows.
now.
Right, you have the Disney shows, and then we have all the movie shows, Pretty Woman, Mean Girls, School of Rock, the Harry Potter show. So it's like they're going backwards now.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Do you remember what your first show was that you saw on Broadway?
I remember my first opera, which was Carmen, at the Old Met with Risa Stevens. Saw that, I think it was 1960 or 61. First show might have been Gypsy, actually, which opened, I believe, in the late 50s, Julie Stein show. And then Funny Girl, which was opened a few years later, the Barbra Streisand's first gig. And I saw that in the original production. I'm trying to think if there was anything earlier that I had a chance to see. It was basically not until the early 60s that I became kind of a regular theater goer and, got to see the shows. But as I said, you could always get the original cast albums. We had a big record, you saw a couple of numbers from West Side Story, the clip with Larry Curd and Carol Lawrence. That was part of the record collection. We had the ATO Pins of Mary Martin collection from South Pacific, and of course Carousel with John Rayton. It was just something that you could relive. The rule of thumb would be you'd see the show, or you'd see numbers from it, like on Ed Sullivan,
Right.
And then everyone would go running out and buying the album because they wanted to be able to play it any time. You didn't have what you have now, Amazon Music and songs on demand. You can download anything at any time and whatever, and the internet. In those days, you actually had to go out and get the album if you wanted to listen.
You had to work a little harder for it.
Again.
These days it's just a click away.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to comment that, and Stacy's going to have no idea what I'm talking about right now.
Sam
But no, not even Sam Goody.
I know Sam
I'm
Goody.
talking about my first taste of Broadway was not on Broadway, but it was at the Jones Beach Theater
Okay.
when Guy Lombardo used to do productions
Right.
every summer. I remember seeing Sound of Music there. I remember South Pacific. And that was really, I think I was like 5, 6 years old.
Right.
And I still remember those shows. My folks used to take us every year. And it was great.
Yeah.
And then eventually I got into,
Went
to
go
see a real
on
one.
Broadway.
Yeah.
that was
In the
back when
city.
the Jones Beach Theater was
Jones Beach
was the
Theater,
Jones
not
Beach
like
Theater.
When it became the
Right.
Nikon, now
Right.
it's like
Right.
Northwell, all that. No,
Right.
my first I think was Cats,
Yeah, you
which
know.
I know everyone hates. All my friends tell me that, but that's the one I remember going to go see.
Well, yeah, you have the one signature song, Memory,
Yeah.
was from Cats, and what's one of the interesting things about the original cast, I think had Betty Buckley, who
Yeah, they were saying for her
had
singing it.
she was one of the ladies, along with people like Shirley Jones, Florence Henderson, Jan Clayton, who I neglected to mention was the original cast of Carousel, who either started on Broadway and then had gigs as moms on TV.
Okay.
Jan Clayton became the first mom on Lassie, the TV show Lassie, with Tommy Reddick. Florence Henderson, of course, from the Brady Bunch,
Yeah.
who was on Broadway originally. Shirley Jones, who wound up on the Partridge
Yeah.
Family. She was under exclusive contract to Rodgers and Hammerstein. And Betty Buckley had that show, I think it was Eight is Enough on TV.
Yeah.
Which was also kind of like a family show with Dick Van Patten, I think, was a co-star.
That's another trend that's going the other way now. Back
Mhm.
then, people would start on Broadway and then make their way over to the movies.
Right.
Nowadays,
Now
you've got
they
movie
started
stars who
doing-
decide they want to
Yeah.
do a show on
Yeah.
Broadway.
Yeah, Jeff Daniels I saw just opened in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Right.
Yeah.
It was reviewed in today's newspaper. Yeah.
As I was watching the clips that you were showing, I noticed most of them came from, I guess, what we would call the golden age of Broadway. And my question for you is whether that's a function of you knowing your audience or you knowing preferring a particular time frame, or feeling that maybe what was being written back then was a little bit
All three.
all three.
All three.
Okay.
Yeah, the audience I tend to get, whether it's for this show or some of my film retrospectives or certainly the opera programs I do, or a program on the golden age of radio and television, which basically goes back to the 50s and 60s, stuff like I Love Lucy and the Carol Burnett Show and, programs like that. They're basically designed for seniors. And since a lot of my programs are done on weekdays in the afternoon, not all, I'll do evening programs also, you're going to get naturally a lot of retirees, because they have the time to come and sit and, they're not taking off from work, they're not missing any, job time or anything like that. But it's also, you mentioned, is it something I have a special affinity for? And yeah, I'm not going to do a program on something that I don't, if it's something I'm going to put together and perform, 10, 12, 20 times, and some of my programs I have done, this one you saw today, I'm sure I've done at least a dozen times. It better be something I'm going to enjoy over and over again.
Right.
Yeah,
So
that's important.
that's a big factor,
A lot of the shows that we're referring to, you talked about Oklahoma, South Pacific, all of them, you talk about as classics. If you had to hazard a guess 20, 30 years
From
into the
now?
future, what current that might be deemed in that category?
What current show
Yeah.
that's playing on Broadway now?
Take a stab.
Well, I mean, there are some shows I mentioned in connection with the Phantom of the Opera that's running 31 years, so that's technically current. Les Mis, which opened at the same time and has been, revived many times over the years. I think Lion King has been,
forever,
up there
yeah.
I
in
was like,
terms
I
of
will.
longevity.
I'll say that.
Yeah.
That'll be a classic
Yeah,
forever.
so, you have, Elton John and Tim Rice. A lot of people don't realize that Tim Rice, who did the lyrics for that, combined with Andrew Lloyd Webber to do Evita, which was a wonderful show that preceded Phantom of the Opera, as far as the, Andrew Lloyd Webber songbook. So, those are all, any of the ones you mentioned earlier, I don't see being revived or you know, the tribute shows that you mentioned.
Right.
You know, they did one. You saw Jessie Mueller being interviewed. She had done the Carole King. She had played Carole King in Beautiful on Broadway. But you know, I don't see those shows having the legs or the longevity of some of these shows. I mentioned Cole Porter's Kiss Me Kate is being revived. That's a show. I mean, when you look at the list of songs, Wunderbar, another opening, another show, So in Love, which is my particular favorite. I would have done that today, except it's not really a duet. It's sung separately by the male and female leads. That's a show that, you know, has been, you know, reprised many times over the years, because you have to remember it already has a built-in audience. When you go see a musical for the first time, now it could have great music, but you're listening to songs you've never heard before.
Right.
You know, unless you somehow got a preview, you know, you bought the CD before you went to see the shows, which is, you know, one way of doing it. But when you go to see a revival of, say, My Fair Lady, which was a wonderful production at Lincoln Center that I had the pleasure of seeing last spring, you know every note of every song.
Right.
So, you know, it has that built-in resonance with the audience, because it's just a matter of, okay, this is a terrific song. How does this voice compare to the way Julie Andrews sang it in the original show? Or, you know, is Professor Higgins that you're seeing on Broadway as good as the performance that Rex Harrison gave, you know, both in the original show and in the movie? One of the things that Hollywood, one of my favorite stories about My Fair Lady that I like to relate, is the fact that when they did the film version in 1964, Julie Andrews should have gotten the role because she was a big hit in Broadway. You know, when they did, you know, when the original show opened in 1956. Subsequently, she did done Camelot with Richard Burton on Broadway, but Jack Warner, who was producing it for Warner Brothers in Hollywood, wanted somebody with a Hollywood resume, somebody who was a successful actress, even if she couldn't sing, because what Hollywood could do would be dub the voice.
Yeah.
Okay? So Audrey Hepburn had a list of one great movie after another. You know, a few years earlier she had done Breakfast at Tiffany's, and, you know, of course, Roman Holiday with Gregory Peck a decade earlier, won the Oscar for that in her first movie role. So he said, I want Audrey Hepburn. So he got Audrey Hepburn. They dubbed her by Marnie Nixon. So when you hear, you know, Eliza Doolittle doing I Could Have Danced All Night, that's not Audrey Hepburn singing. That's
So
Marnie
the musical
Nixon.
had a leading lady and a leading man who couldn't
But
sing.
Yeah, essentially. But the punchline of the story is that when the Oscars came out in 1965, the movie won Best Film, but the leading actress, the Best Actress award, went to Julie Andrews, but not for, obviously, My Fair Lady, for Mary Poppins, which she had starred in, you know, the same year. When she didn't get the role she wanted, Disney called her up and said, I want you to be in Mary Poppins. And when she came up to accept the award, one of the things she said on stage was, I want to thank Jack Warner for not casting me in My Fair Lady, because otherwise I perhaps might not have gotten this. So, and now of course I understand the sequel is coming out.
Coming out
Wonderful
for the
advanced
holidays.
reviews with Emily Blunt.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be terrific.
They're happy because they're saying that she could sing, and like I've seen her when they did the Into the Woods movie.
Right. Okay.
And I was like, okay.
And there's an example of what we were talking about earlier. Everyone who is familiar with the original Mary Poppins, and how can you not be?
Of course.
Because even if you didn't see it in the original theater, you know, you grew up with it as a kid, you could watch it on DVD or you know, on tape or in the movies, you know, on TV, whatever. So that already has a built-in audience, you know. So even if the movie turns out to be less than, you know, advertised, and it doesn't look like it will be, it should be really good, you know, it's going to do very well at the box office.
And I think also they got the excitement because Lin-Manuel Miranda's
Oh,
playing,
yeah.
and he's just, everyone loves him,
Yeah.
especially I'd say
He's
like my
being
generation.
honored, or he already was, but they didn't telecast it yet, at the Kennedy Center. He was one of the honorees this year, I believe, at the Kennedy Center.
Wow.
Which is what's really unusual. It's not that he doesn't deserve it. He's an amazingly talented guy, but the fact that he's doing it. What is he? 35?
Yeah,
40?
really young.
Yeah,
really
he's-
young.
Very young guy. Most of the time, it's almost like a lifetime achievement. You don't get a Kennedy Center, until you're in your 60s or 70s usually. So the fact that they're running out of nominees, and they have to find 5 people well, maybe they want better ratings and they know that he's going to draw, a better audience. Yeah.
What's your favorite musical?
Favorite musical, I actually have that on my website, and I kind of go back and forth a little bit. I think on my website, I probably put Les Mis, either that or Phantom, but I've been doing a whole retrospective on Leonard Bernstein during this year because of this centennial.
Right.
And I don't know of a better musical in terms of one song being, where there isn't a song that not that you fall asleep during it, but you'd say, oh, that's a good song, but I'm waiting for the next one, the big hit. Like Carousel is a great musical, but there are some songs there that, they're all right, but they're not spectacular. South Pacific, I think, has more hits from that show than Carousel or Oklahoma. But when you look at West Side Story, there isn't a song in that show, whether it's a number done to dance or, an instrumental number, or any of the duets I played today, somewhere, it's just an amazing show. And in the retrospective I put together on Bernstein, I discuss, and you see video clips of Jerome Robbins, whose idea it was to put this together. It was originally going to be East Side Story. He moved and it was going to be, he changed it from ethnic gangs, I think a Jewish gang and a Gentile gang, to Puerto Ricans, and
Wow.
He changed the whole idea of it. And there's a scene from a musical that Rogers wrote with Larry Hart called On Your Toes, that's known as Slaughter on 10th Avenue. And the ballet sequence, it was choreographed by George Balanchine, who was a very popular choreographer back then. And if you watch that, you can see it online. Gene Kelly does it with Vera Ellen. The inspiration of that, there wound up being a lot of what he put into West Side Story a decade later. And it was his idea to, for example, separate the cast members. It wasn't that the gangs would, during rehearsal, for example, go out for coffee or beer afterwards. If you were on the Jets, you weren't allowed to talk to people on the Sharks.
Oh, wow.
And he had an imaginary line on stage, one gang on this side, one gang on this side. And you could not associate with, he wanted that kind of structural tension among the cast members. And it was also the first show where everybody had a name. Even if you had a minor role, you could be the 5th assistant to whatever, someone who had basically hardly any singing part, and
Right.
you actually had a name in the show, which was rather unusual then.
Wow.
And the way Sondheim, worked with Bernstein and Jerome Robbins and Arthur Lorenz, who did the book, I think I've come around to changing my feeling that might be the greatest show ever put on Broadway.
Got to update your website.
Yeah, have to. Yeah.
I don't have one. The answer I give my friends, it's the same answer of what my first one was just because I really enjoyed it, seeing Cats with my dad and my mom and my sister. I just remember at the end, they were like, thank God it's over. And I'm like, they were dancing and flipping and oh my God. But
I'm sorry to
yeah,
interrupt. One of the things
that's
that
fine.
amazes me, at least, I'm sure other people, when you see Cats, of course, is the costumes and the makeup
Yeah.
that's involved with it. How
Right.
early the cast members must have to.
Oh, I can only imagine just seeing
I'm
them.
sure if they're doing a matinee in the evening, they probably don't bother taking their makeup
You
off
just could leave it
in
on,
between,
few touch-ups.
and yeah, exactly. A show like Wicked, for example, where
Oh,
they have,
with,
with
the green alphabet, yeah.
Alphabet wearing the green makeup and everything, with Dina Menzel in the original cast. That's another terrific show, that should have
Yeah.
a really long run, the way that was structured, Stephen Schwartz production.
Okay.
Do you have one, Barney? A favorite musical?
Actually, again, the first real Broadway show, even though I didn't see it on Broadway, I said was South Pacific, which I still resonates in my head. But the Broadway show, I remember taking my kids to see Cats, not to, and that also has an emotional connection. Beyond that, let me think which ones I really liked. I liked Les Mis.
I haven't seen that.
You haven't seen Les Mis?
No, I know I need to, and I know they actually just did another. I know they had a movie rendition of it, and they just did another movie one.
And there's an interesting factoid regarding the movie. We were talking about how with Audrey Hepburn they dubbed her voice.
Yeah.
Okay. Usually when they film a musical, the movie version of a musical, the actors, even if it's their real voices, like for example, today I did a scene from Showboat with Howard Keel and Katherine Grayson. Those were their voices, but it wasn't recorded at the time the scene was done because you can't get the same resonance. They do it in a recording studio, and what the actors are doing is lip syncing to their own voices.
Oh, wow.
And the first time that they changed that model was in Les Mis, when Anne Hathaway, who won the Oscar, sings "I Dreamed a Dream," and you can see it's done in close-up for two reasons. You want to see her in total expression, and also all of the mics are very much. If you pulled back, you'd see all the microphones because she is being recorded as she's singing it. The director felt that in order to get that kind of raw emotion that goes into that song, if she lip synced it, it wouldn't, come over nearly as strongly. And that was the first time in the history of Hollywood that the final print of the movie contained a song that was sung live. Okay, live for the movie. If you want to put it in that
Interesting
context.
to know.
That I didn't necessarily
And one of the
know.
things I try to do with my programs, and you heard a couple of anecdotes I shared today, the one about Cole Porter, imagine it took two people to write one
Right.
song. The audience gets a kick out of that because it adds to the overall appreciation of what goes into, putting these programs together. There's a certain amount of research. You can't just play one video clip and then go on to the next one and introduce this one or whatever. You have to put it in some kind of context, whether it's historical. I mentioned the number from Babes in Arms, where Ray Heatherton was the original Val, which turned out to be Valentine from My Funny Valentine. And I asked how many of you know that name. Now, if I had asked that to an audience of even people up to say 50 or 55, the name would go right past you. But when you get people who remember a show called The Merry Mailman, which was kind of a kid's show on TV in the 50s, they know that character. And he was also the father of somebody who became a star in her own right, Joey Heatherton.
Right.
Who became.
I remember Joey
You
Heatherton.
remember Joey?
Right.
Yeah. But that was his first gig on Broadway as Val in the Babes in Arms, that show.
We will look forward to that. And again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And this concludes the latest chapter of Turn the Page.
Yep, we'll be closing this chapter.
Thank
to
you.
the new one.
Thank you.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.